David Bernstein. I'm founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, and this is the SpeechCast, a webcast and podcast that we hold jointly with the Speech Project of the Jewish Journal. And today, I'm very happy to have Lenore Skenazy on. Lenore is somebody I've known for quite a while. She really has founded an entire movement called Free Range Kids, and going back, it's somebody I've looked to over the years, and I really appreciate that you're coming on and that we get to discuss some of these issues.
Yeah, I remember the first time we met, it was almost clandestine. It was in Union Station in like an obscure little croissant place. And, you believe this? I believe this.
Right, exactly. We had those conversations. Actually, I think we might have met one time before, maybe where it was where you live in Queens. You took me on a tour of and then we ate at some Indian place, or I ate. I think you watched me because you weren't going to eat dinner. But anyway, tell me about the movement and how it got started. A little bit about your story and how it got started.
All right, I'll take you back to the moment, which was a zillion years ago already, when our 9-year-old, and I say that's me and my husband's 9-year-old, our younger son, had been asking us if we would take him someplace he'd never been before and let him find his own way home on the subway. This was his dearest dream. And since we're always on the subway, and that's how we get around the city, and we are familiar with it as opposed to familiar with it on movies, we said yes. And so he took the subway from Bloomingdale's, where I dropped him off, down to our house. We were living on the east side of Manhattan at the time, came through the door levitating with pride and excitement. And I was a columnist at the late lamented New York Sun at the time. And so I wrote a column, Why I Let My 9-Year-Old Ride the Subway Alone. 2 days later, I was on the Today Show, MSNBC, Fox News, and NPR. And finally, David Bernstein's podcast, explaining why I had let him do this. And for my trusting him, trusting my city, trusting my own parenting of him and my husband's, I got labeled America's worst mom. But I started a blog that weekend to explain my side of things, which is that I am a nervous, look at this Jewish podcast, I'm a Jewish mom, right? We have a reputation to uphold. I'm very nervous. I am so sorry that son is now, I'm happy that he's now 23. I'm so sorry he's buying a car. Oh my God, driving drives me crazy. Kids looking at their phone when they cross the street drives me crazy. Almost everything drives me crazy. It was just the 4th of July, another son setting off fireworks. All that stuff drives me crazy with fear, but I'm not afraid of strangers, and I'm not afraid of public transportation. So I started the blog to say I love safety, but I think you can take your eyes off your kids sometime, and that's not a crime. It's not even crazy. It's good for them, and it's good for you. It gives you some free time. And from that blog, Free Range Kids, grew the book Free Range Kids, and now I have to hold up. And now the second edition of Free Range Kids that just came out a couple weeks ago, with an intro, a foreword by Jonathan Haidt and his wife and his 10-year-old daughter, all saying, yay, this gave us a lot of courage to let go. That's it. So that's sort of the formation of the movement. And then I just want to add that a couple of years ago, John Haidt and Daniel Shuckman, who had been the chairman of FIRE, which fights for free speech on campus, he'd been chairman of it for about 10 years. Those two were talking to each other and saying, there's something where kids are coming on campus, they're fragile. They think that when they're uncomfortable, they're actually unsafe. That's something, sort of a wrong framing of things. It must be something that's happening when they're younger that is sort of, making them think that they can handle less than they actually can. Who is fighting the overprotection that has taken away kids, I would say, seichel and chutzpah, if I may, which is their smarts and their moxie. And they found me because I've been saying for a long time, our kids are safer and smarter than our culture gives them credit for. So we founded a new organization, a nonprofit called Let Grow. And Let Grow is just trying to make it easy, normal, and legal to give kids back some very just normal, old-fashioned independence.
Right. So yours was not the only case of this. I've had my own case where, I felt my kids were being improperly regulated by a regulatory regime in schools, and all kinds of outrageous punishments that were put in place. I also, in
Draconian
raising my
leaps.
younger son, when he was, I remember being about 6 years old, and we have this alley in the back that was very safe, and there were barely everybody who knew each other in the alley, and somehow it was not allowed. The culture did not allow us, the culture of our little neighborhood did not allow us to allow our 5 or 6 year old to be in that alley at all without a parent being there physically. And I used to think, God, when I was that age, I was free range, right? I was already, walking to my friend's house, and yet this was somehow not allowed. And so I figured that something had gone wrong in our culture. That was really coddling kids. And so I'm so glad you came in and gave voice to that and are helping change the culture.
Not just me, yeah.
Yeah, not just you, but you built the movement. I had Greg Lukianoff on a different podcast recently. And
you're
Greg
just podcasting crazy.
I am. And Greg is the co-author with Jonathan Haidt of Codling of the American Mind. And I asked him, where are we with coddling? I mean, you wrote that in 2018. He said, well, things have gotten worse, except in one area. And that's in what Lenore does around free range kids and parenting and so forth. Why is Greg optimistic about sanguine? The work you've done? So yes, exactly.
Well, I have to say that this past May was really a watershed moment for Let Grow and free range and whatever you want to call it, in that we've been trying to pass some laws so that parents don't have to second guess when they think their kids are ready to play outside, walk to school, maybe stay home while, a parent runs an errand. And one law was passed in 2018, and that was in Utah, and they called it the free range parenting law. It made me feel really great. And then there was a couple of fallow years when we were trying to get some more laws passed, and it didn't happen. But in May, Oklahoma and then Texas passed what's now called a reasonable childhood independence law, which does two fantastic things. First of all, it says that just trusting your kid with some independence is not neglect. If you think that your kid is ready to do some things on their own and you're not putting them in, obvious, statistically likely danger, you don't have to worry. We will not consider it neglect. The state cannot consider that neglect. Me thinking that my 7-year-old is ready, or even my 5-year-old ready to play in the alley in the backyard where I know there aren't a lot of cars and I know the other people, that's up to me. But it even went further than the original free range law in that it also said that poverty is not neglect. Because what if you're a single mom? Actually, there was an interesting case just a couple months ago. There was a single mom in Ohio, I think. She worked evenings, not totally overnight, at a pizza parlor. So she left her 10-year-old home with the 2-year-old. And somebody called up and said, there's a lady who left her kids, who abandoned her children. And she was thrown in jail, and it was a felony charge against her. And I'm happy to say that when the case got attention, everyone was on the mom's side because they recognized sometimes you're poor and you don't have the perfect middle class opportunity to hire a babysitter with a PhD in child development to stay with your children for $40 an hour and play educational games with them. Sometimes you have to trust your 10-year-old who to be okay with the 2-year-old in a house in a place that you feel they're safe. And so this law, when it passed in Oklahoma and in Texas, specifically said that we're not going to mistake poverty for neglect. If you don't have the perfect helicopter parenting situation, that's not a crime. Thank God. So it's, it got bipartisan support in part because, first of all, a lot of people.
Commonsensical.
Well, it's commonsensical. A lot of people are parents who are passing these laws. And also it sort of appeals to everybody's parenting experiences. And if you're a Democrat and you recognize this as pretty much a social justice issue, just like we shouldn't stop and frisk everyone, we shouldn't also be watching to see if a poor person ever leaves a child alone and immediately pounce on them. And then similarly, you don't want the government intruding on family decision making and families, period. And I've over the years, I have just sort of publicized a whole lot of cases where that happened
The Métis, wasn't the Métis
The
family? If I'm not
Métis, yes.
Métis family, right, out of
Yeah,
Silver Spring, Maryland, my neck of the woods. They had their, what is it, a 10-year-old
a
walk or
10-year-old
6-year-old?
and the 6-year-old were playing at the park and they walked home by themselves and somebody saw them. And actually the last leg of that journey home it was on a Shabbat, actually. They were accompanied by police. And I was just talking to Danielle because I remembered one of the details a little imperfectly, and she corrected me. What happened is the police brought the children to their home. There's their dad. Danielle happened to be out of town. And they needed proof that this was really the father. It's like, well, didn't you just walk them home to this house? Aren't they saying daddy? And they said, no, we need proof. You must go in and get your ID. And so he's opening the door because he doesn't want his children taken away. And one of the cops said, you better come down with only your ID or shots may be fired. So sure enough, he came down with only his ID, and then they had to. It is unbelievable. And what they put in place was a quote unquote safety plan. You don't have to go to court to get a safety plan because ostensibly parents are agreeing to it. It's like, will you sign this and agree that you will not let your children out of your sight until there is a hearing on your case from Child Protective Services? And the alternative is don't sign it and we'll just take away your kids. So, it didn't go to court, but it's not like parents really have, any choice at all. So he signed that, but it's crazy to promise that you're not going to take your eyes off your children who are 10 and 6. And why would the government think that somebody marching the kids home knows those children better than their own parents or loves those children more than their own parents? And if the parents think that the children are ready for this, that should be the end of it, unless, as I said, the parents have put their children in obvious and statistically likely danger.
Right. Yeah, that word statistically likely is something that people sort of forget. They don't do the actual analysis of a situation. What feels risky is sometimes not risky, and sometimes what is risky doesn't feel risky.
That's true. I mean, I think that there's something strange about our culture, and I it's elusive to me, but I always feel there's something similar about, say, a case like the Métis and the TSA. It's like, okay, I just, you'd think I would get over this already, but they did take away my unopened jar of peanut butter once, claiming it was a liquid, and I claimed it wasn't. But how statistically likely is it that, a schlumpy middle-aged mom coming through with her peanut butter, just trying to get home from a business trip, is going to blow up a plane with a meticulously resealed jar of Jif? It's just not that likely. And yet we reward our society. We say, well, it's better safe than sorry. And I'm not sure how much better off we are making no calculations on the other side. What is lost when we take away freedom? And in the case of children, so we're taking away their freedom, and parents are sometimes second guessing their decision to let their children play outside. I did an incredibly unscientific poll on Twitter and then also on letgrow.org, which is our website, asking, have you ever decided not to let your kids do something you felt they were ready to do because you were afraid that somebody else might call 911 or misinterpret it as neglect? And it was a majority. It was 55% on Twitter. And then people who come to our site, obviously, it was way off the charts. It was 80-something%. And there is a price paid when you don't let your kids play outside. First of all, you're stuck with them all the time, and the burden always falls more disproportionately on the mother. There are studies showing that mothers are spending, I can't remember, it's like 4.5 more hours per week on childcare than they did in the 70s when all the kids were playing outside and the parents weren't even working. So they had a lot of time with their kids in the 70s, but we're spending more because we're so busy overseeing them. So that's from the parents' side. But from the children's side, there's been an increase in all sorts of things I hate to talk about, like anxiety, depression, and suicide. I can't even talk about it. It's too scary to me. But children's mental health is not going in a great direction. And I'm talking about pre-COVID, forget all the mishigas with COVID. And our working theory, and of course, it's hard to prove correlation, causation, all these different things. But as children's freedom has gone down, anxiety has gone up. And while I can't prove that one caused the other, I can tell you when a regular person, when an adult's freedom goes down, when they're micromanaged or imprisoned or always watched or have somebody else making all their decisions for them, and they can't even show that they're competent and wise and ready for the world, That's depressing. And I'm not surprised that kids would be depressed too if everything is being driven to an activity run by an adult and then driven from that activity to the homework supervised by an adult and the reading log read to and then signed by an adult and then back to school for a day of less and less recess and more instruction. That's depressing.
Yeah, so you're talking about a larger culture of safetyism that has sort of set in, that has some really negative effects. One of them is mental health and depression and anxiety. Are there other things that you're seeing even further downstream that might be of concern to us that we should really watch out for, and why we need to tackle something that looks like just a parenting issue, right? It's not just a parenting issue. It's about how we look at the individual and so forth.
Oh my God, I had like 15 answers in my head just now for each and every word that you mentioned. But let me just give you an example of what I've seen happening. And I'll give you two from different ages.
Mm-hmm.
I interviewed a third grader once. I was just interviewing a bunch of people at a school. And I asked him, what would you like to do on your own? You know, just finally break free, be your own kid. You know, what would you like to do that would make you feel really sort of grown up? And he said he wanted to get to his karate class by himself. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, bike or foot, you know, or maybe skateboard. You tell me. And he was like, no. I opened the car door and I get out and I look both ways very carefully and I close the car door. And then I go into karate by myself while my mom parks the car in the parking lot.
She doesn't even allow him to do that.
It's just so interesting to me that a red-blooded 9-year-old American kid in almost any other generation, and certainly a 9-year-old in almost any other culture, would not think of getting to a class by himself, leaving the car and walking in while his mom parked. And I mean, that, I don't know if you find that as creepy and disturbing as I do, but when your dream of independence is zero independence, I worry about our culture, right? We're the land of the free and the home of the brave. If you don't feel like you can be brave, except walking for 30 seconds without your mom in obviously a place that you think is safe enough to go to this class, that's disturbing. And then there was a 7th grade teacher on Long Island who collected a lot of answers for us about a very similar question. She had asked her students, what were they interested in doing? They felt they were sort of ready to do, but they were hesitant to try. And the answers were, you know, they were shocking to me. I've seen answers like this since then at a lot of other places. So they've stopped shocking me, but I hope they'll shock you. One kid was afraid to walk the dog because it might get off the leash. A kid was afraid to go into the store because it was filled with strangers and he'd never been in one without his mom. A kid was afraid to climb a tree because he could fall and break a bone and hurt himself. And another kid said, 3 kids actually in her class of, she saw all the kids in the grade, which is 240 kids. 3 kids said that they were afraid to use a knife, a sharp knife, because they had not been allowed to yet. And so what's interesting to me is that these kids have internalized the fear that they will be kidnapped, that they will break bones, that they will be completely incompetent, that the worst possible thing will happen, the dog will get off the leash. Most dogs don't get off leashes, okay? No. And also, I really wanted to do a video, and I have not figured out how to do it, showing how hard it is to actually saw off your fingers when you're cutting a cucumber. You can get a nick. I've done it myself, but you really can't inflict hideous, Monty Python-esque danger when you're cutting up the vegetables for dinner. So what these kids have internalized is what I call worst first thinking. You can call it catastrophizing, but I call it worst first because they come with the worst case scenario first and proceed as if it's likely to happen. And the way you proceed is by becoming extremely passive. And so when you ask what's happening further down the line, I see kids thinking of things that aren't dangerous as dangerous because their whole life they've been told that things that really aren't dangerous, waiting in the car for a few minutes while your mom picks up the dry cleaning or gets a roast chicken from the store, that's not dangerous, but it has been told to them it's dangerous. It's been told to the parents it's dangerous. And you start hallucinating danger. And you also start sort of equating feeling uncomfortable or a little unsure of yourself as being unsafe. And that's where it collides with this idea of safetyism. If nothing feels comfortable and you interpret being uncomfortable as being unsafe, then you can outlaw everything. You can outlaw free speech because it makes you uncomfortable. It's like, well, free speech is just speech.
Right.
Can I just say one other thing?
Please.
Because I'm slightly on a rant, which is that you tell me, did you grow up doing the sticks and stones thing? Do you remember that?
Yeah,
Jan?
sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Yeah, that was like central.
Why were you taught that? Were you taught that because adults are jerks?
Your parents also no. Well, your parents also didn't want you to throw a punch at somebody else just because somebody said, called you a name or whatever. Like that's part of it as well. Is like you had to just put up with a little bit of name calling, and that was part of making a resilient child, and also to teach you not to throw punches at people who,
Yeah. That's interesting. I having grown up as a girl, I never even thought of punching anyone back, and I just thought that
Right.
I got the second part of of your idea, which is that okay, look, this gives you a way of a force field around you. All right, you want to call me, a moron or a pig or whatever, ugly, go right ahead, because names can never hurt me. Inside, I might be going, oh, this feels so terrible, but outwardly, and sort of. There's that Rodgers and Hammerstein song. Whenever I feel afraid, I hold my head erect and whistle a happy tune so no one will suspect I'm afraid. That's sort of what the sticks and stones quote was. It was just a way of holding yourself together and looking above things. And frankly, if you're above things, who's going to keep bothering you? It's no fun. So the reason I bring up that phrase is because it's being taught differently today in some places. And it is that
I heard. Yeah, go say it.
Right. So it's sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will hurt forever, or names will scar forever, or names can kill.
That is hilarious.
Well, and
not
poignant.
hilarious. Hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the people teaching it recognize a great truth, which is that it's not that names don't hurt, but the people who created, in the hoary past, who created the phrase to begin with, also recognize that names hurt, and they were trying to give kids a way to be able to go forth in a world where things are going to be frustrating, and some people aren't going to understand you, and some people aren't going to be nice. And by suggesting that the words can hurt and kill, and not giving you any jujitsu back at them. Okay, say it, but you're not going to hurt me. It's really seeing kids as very vulnerable and not resilient.
Right.
And I'm not saying that these words don't hurt, but there was a reason that the phrase was phrased the opposite for hundreds of years before the very, very recent transformation of that phrase to indicate that children are fragile, that anything bad that happens to them impacts their soul, and they may never recover.
Right. And it sort of goes into this sort of harm versus intent idea as well that we had with my son's situation, that I had a principal saying that a picture that he took with a toy gun was causing harm to other kids. And it doesn't matter that he intended it as simply a picture of him in a toy gun. And I worry like it's giving rise to a whole sort of new moral code that people are buying into that is probably not very good for a free society.
Absolutely true. The interesting thing is a gun in a photo can't harm someone.
Right.
I mean, it just like sort of like words can't actually, chop off a finger. If everything is seen as potentially harmful because somebody might find it objectionable or painful or annoying or sad, then nobody can say anything or show anything, because there's always the potential that someone somewhere could be hurt by it. And so you can't, there's no such thing as free speech if everything is interpreted by sort of the least charitable way and the most safetyism way. I don't want to see a kid with a gun in a picture, but if it's a joke and if they don't mean it, and if they tell people they don't mean it, that's not, I'm coming to the school to kill you, right? That's a picture. And in the olden days, before the internet, the picture, wouldn't even be someplace where most people could see it, and it wouldn't be permanent. But now there's just this extra layer of anything you say is snapshotted or screenshotted forever. And suddenly it's like, well, I just better not. I'm worried, you have to worry about every podcast. Did I say something that will be taken out of context and sound like Lenore says kids should bully each other because it's good for them? I'm not saying that. But you have to worry when things will be misinterpreted in the least charitable way.
Yeah. So one of the outgrowths, it seems, of this safetyist culture was a whole series of sex offender laws and registry and so forth. And I know you've talked and written about that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what the issue is there? I mean, it seems like we should all support a sex offender registry because we're protecting our kids, and
Yeah.
we don't want sex offenders living next door who could prey upon our kids. But so tell us where that came from and where it's going.
Okay, that's a very long story, and I really recommend Emily Horowitz as a guest to explain the origins of this registry and how it's burgeoned. She and I did an analysis of one state, of Texas, looking at the numbers there, and we came up with the very scary realization that your child is more likely to end up on the sex offense registry than to be molested by someone on it. So that should make people, take pause. The sex offense registry sounds like something that's keeping kids safe, and who wouldn't want that?
Right.
Studies are showing that it actually isn't moving the needle at all. And it sort of points parents and adults in the wrong direction, because it says stranger danger, and this guy who did something down the street is the danger, when really the vast majority of crimes against children, including sexual crimes against them, are caused by people that they know. And often that's a family member or a close friend. It's not just some person on the registry 3 blocks away. And the sad thing about the registry is that it's sort of an add-on. I mean, if you've committed a crime, especially a sex crime against a child, you're not going away for an insubstantial amount of time. You're going to prison for a long time, like people who have done all sorts of other horrible crimes. When those other people get out of prison, they go through, I think, probation or parole, and then they become members of society again. For instance, in Florida, there's a great law recently that let people who had committed a felony now be allowed to vote again. Like, there was a recognition of rehabilitation and redemption. People have the mistaken assumption, as did I, until I started getting tutored, that if you're a person who has committed a sex offense, you're sort of a monster, and you're compelled to do it the second you see a child, whether it's on a playground or a bus stop. But in fact, the recidivism rate of people who have committed sex crimes and been found guilty of them is actually very low. It's way lower than other crimes like assault and burglary, any other violent crime except murder. So we put people on a registry after they've served their time, as if this is going to somehow prevent them from hurting more kids and allow parents to see the dangers in their neighborhood. But the dangers in their neighborhood are more in their house and in their, church or temple or whatever. And in the meantime, people who are on the registry can't live near a church, a house. They can't live like a church, a school, a daycare center, a playground. And it becomes like there's almost no place for them to live. And actually, what makes anybody a more law-abiding citizen is having a stable situation, living with your family, being able to hold a job. And all those things become impossible for people on the registry. So the studies show it's not making kids any safer. It's making the life impossible for this person who has committed a crime and paid their debt to society. And oftentimes it's like you have to go to register, to go to like a psychological, go to therapy every Wednesday afternoon at 3 for the rest of your life in several states. And so you can't ever hold a job. And so it's really destabilizing people who probably weren't going to commit another crime anymore. And it's creating a whole group of people that we think of as monsters, who are actually people who have committed crimes and gone on to serve their time and come out just like anybody else. If you don't,
aren't some of them like 20-year-old guy dates a 15-year-old girl, and that is considered a sex crime, and then is on the sex registry for the rest of his life?
Yes. I mean, there's almost 1 million people on it now. It's somewhere over 900,000 people. And there are people who have committed crimes I don't even want to think about.
Sure.
And then there are, as you said, there's the 19-year-old there's actually, year-wise, you can be a freshman and have a boyfriend who's a senior. And if you end up having sex, or God forbid, sexting. Sometimes sexting is actually a higher crime because it's considered sending child pornography, creating and disseminating
Wow.
child
Yeah,
pornography.
that's
So there are the crazy ones too. You know, you pee in public, or
right.
it's actually worse if you've had if you're gay and you've had sex with a kid just a little bit younger or older than you. So there are all sorts of reasons not to have the sex offense registry. But it's I was just writing about this. Once we've made something that seems like that has popular appeal and feels like it's making kids safer or making the country safer, whether it is or not, including things like the TSA that takes away the peanut butter, how do you repeal that? How do you say, wait a minute, we actually went overboard in protecting and we don't need all that? And I think of, believe it or not, my ketchup bottle, because you get ketchup today, and I think it's Heinz, and it has a plastic seal over the top, and then you unscrew the top after you've taken off the plastic seal, and underneath that is another plastic seal that you have to pull out, and then finally you can get to your ketchup. And to say, like, you know what, we don't need 3 layers of safety there. I think that, you know, ketchup is safe enough with maybe 1. I don't know how you go back and convince Heinz, you know, you overdid it. This is crazy.
Right.
You're adding 7 cents to every bottle. You don't need it. And to even suggest that it's okay makes it sound like I don't care about safety, which I think we've established I really do care about.
Establish my eyes. So one other third rail.
Another third rail. Geez.
Another third rail.
I'm trying to imagine what. We talked about the registry.
Tracking our kids' smartphones and so forth. That has become really popular. Look, I have 2 teenage stepkids. I have a teenager myself, and one who's just, you know, in his 20s, is no longer under any sort of surveillance system that I know of. But you know,
probably a lot of surveillance, just not by you.
Yeah, probably a lot, but not by me. But you know, there was a lot of pressure, and even there are these little school seminars that come, how you can like make sure your kids are okay by monitoring all their social media traffic, and we can also put trackers on our kids' location. Which sometimes, by the way, I'll do almost on a volunteer basis. Like, you're going, you know, you're out at night. Can you send me your location? So, you know, but I don't do it all the time.
That's them opting in, right?
That's them opting in a way. Yeah, maybe a little pressure. Maybe I give them $10 to go, you know, the arcade or whatever. But I do worry. I worry about that. You know, when I was 16, my mom couldn't track me everywhere.
Right.
And she couldn't listen to my phone calls, yet somehow we think it's okay to listen to our kids' Snapchats and everything else, and to monitor those. So what gives?
Yeah, this is when I worry that the insouciance of Greg Lukianoff about, you know, really starting to recognize that safetyism is kind of crazy, and that we've gone overboard, and now laws are giving parental, you know, decision-making back to parents so they can let their kids go free. But in the meantime, we have technology, which is always promising to make you feel more calm, you know, well, give you finally peace of mind. You can know exactly where your child is. And I'm like, peace of mind is when I don't know exactly where my child is. It feels like the minute you say you can track everything about your kid, and it really starts when the child is born and in the crib, which has like nothing in it, no blanket anymore, and no stuffed animals, and no bumpers, and no lint, no nothing except this thing on their ankle, which can give you a readout on their temperature, movement level, pulse, and blood oxygen level. This is the beginning of tracking your kids. Right. And why it's disturbing to me is those were, that's a device that was created for the neonatal intensive care unit. And kids in that unit are fragile, right? You have to monitor everything because life hangs in the balance. But when you are selling them to the parent who's lucky enough to have a healthy child that they've brought home from the hospital and put in that absolutely empty crib, what you're telling them is that they are just as vulnerable. And this is the beginning of training parents to think of their children as always at death's door, always in incredible danger. And once you've convinced parents of that, you can convince them that they better know where their child is at all times. They better know the grade that they just got on the most recent Spanish test. You better see what they were eating. You better hear who they were tweeting. You better watch what they're reading online. And what you're saying is that everything your child is doing is so potentially dangerous, so potentially lethal, that if you're not watching, woe betide you. And the reason this worries me is so many different reasons. One is I actually think if my mom had read my journals, which I was a writer, I read, wrote in every night during my miserable high school years. If I knew that she had read them and read my feelings about boys, read my feelings about her, read my feelings about anything, I might have killed myself, because privacy, being my own person, not being embarrassed or humiliated in front of my mom and dad was extraordinarily important to me. It's extraordinarily important to everyone, humiliation. And so to shunt that aside because their safety is so much more important, my safety depended on having a world unto myself.
Yeah.
So I worry about it for the kids. That's one way I worry about it. I worry about it for the parents because rather than giving them peace of mind, you've now told them that, you really can't be sure your child is breathing from one moment to the next. You better be watching that readout on your phone and make sure that they are. So peace of mind, no, I have peace of mind between this and that. And then I have to wait again for another before I feel safe again. And same with tracking your child. The watch falls off, the phone is left in a locker, and you think that the child is, bound and gagged somewhere. So I don't think it gives parents any peace of mind. And then I think that children, this is the thing that I really want to study, and I would love to study with any of your listeners if they're interested in, is what does it mean to grow up under really, we laugh at it in China. There's this social number, or there's social monitoring. I don't remember what they call it. Where the government is always watching you. And if you smoke a cigarette, you go down a notch. And if you get an A, you go up a notch. And if you talk to me and I once said something bad about Mao, you go down 3 notches. So you stop talking to me, right? Because I'm dragging you down and suddenly I have nobody to talk to. Anyways, it's very, very creepy. And it does everything from sees if your child is in school that day, or were they playing hooky, and were you allowing them to play hooky? You better not let them play hooky because your social score depends on that too. What could be worse? But we're doing it in a slightly less creepy way because it's not the state, but we are doing the same thing. We're finding out our kids' grades. Who are they talking to? What are their texts? What websites are they visiting? And it gets children used to a level of surveillance that I don't think is good, right? I don't want the government watching me that way. I don't want my parents watching me that way. And to go back to the idea of micromanagement and kids feeling anxious and depressed because they don't know what they're capable of because somebody is always helping them and telling them what to do and solving their problems. I'll just tell you one quick story and see if this disturbs you, okay?
Sure.
So there was an article, believe it or not, in the Wall Street Journal called How to Raise a Free-Range Kid. I'm like, hey, call me, but they didn't. And so they were talking about, here's a great way. Why don't you get them a gizmo watch? That gives them freedom, but you can always be tracking where they are, and you can be in touch with them, and they can press a button, and they, even when they're like just 7 or 8 or 9, they can call you and you can hear what's going on in their lives. And it gave an example of a mom who remembered her childhood, her free-range childhood, of going to the creek by herself and how much that used to mean to her. And she loved that. She loved the solitude. She loved the smells and the sounds and loved just spending time there. And she wanted her own daughter, who's 8, to have that same experience. So she gave her daughter a watch, one of these gizmo watches, and her daughter was going somewhere on her own and her bike chain fell off. And so the daughter immediately alerted her parents, and the dad drove right over and fixed her bike chain, and then she went on her way. And I found that incredibly terrible. You tell me, I'm like crazy on this topic. Do you see anything that's less than free range about that?
Yeah, that's definitely not, like, I went to the creek, by the way, all the time. I caught frogs. That's what I did when I was growing up in the summers and so forth. And, first of all, maybe she could have learned to put the chain on herself if she had to by necessity. I have a kid who's sort of naturally free range, and changes his own bike chains. I don't even know how to do it.
Yeah, I don't
So,
know how to do it.
yeah. So, I think that, and yeah, I do think that there's something lost in all that. And it's sort of a false sense of security. Is it better than not letting your kid go to the creek? Yes, it's better than not letting your kid go into the creek. I think that's how I would say. But I don't think that that's the option. I think you can know that they're, in most cases, pretty safe going to the creek, and we should let them go to the creek.
Yeah. So here's, uh, that requires now almost opting out of all the technological surveillance that's available to a parent. And
Yeah.
that worries me because it's harder to opt out of something than it is to just go with the flow. And and yet I think that girl had no, she missed out on I'd say a formative experience, which is either trying to figure out how to fix the chain or walking home with her broken bike and whatever it was, rising to the occasion as opposed to calling the concierge, who happens to be dad. And it's just like when you have a concierge at a hotel, they can recommend the restaurant and tell you what to order and order you the cab, and you can do that and you have a sort of preordained experience that's lovely. But if you don't have the concierge and you start wandering around and you go into this little dive and it turns out the guy there is just starting to make his homemade pasta and would you try it, and you do,
Mm-hmm.
and then in comes the bum who gets fed every night and he has a fantastic story, and you leave kind of late and drunk and you stumble home, and on the way there you hear a gypsy playing music. I mean, that's all these good and bad and weird and interesting experiences that you get to experience. I mean, that's the word, experiences, and interact with and deal with and come home with an experience that you have lived, as opposed to one that's sort of like a coloring
Curated
book.
by your parents, right?
Right. And I just worry that in our desire to give kids the best experience all the time, one that they're not frustrated and there's somebody to help them, and I'm watching you and nothing bad will happen to you. It's sort of like, Finding Nemo. It's like, well, if nothing happens to her, nothing happens to her.
Right.
Not that you want something bad to happen, but a little bad thing did happen. The chain fell off and she was not allowed to see how she could deal with it. She was immediately assisted. And, you look at bigger implications of that. You're at college, and now the college mental health services are overwhelmed. And I'm glad that kids feel like they can go to
Right.
see a therapist without it being an embarrassing thing. But they're going to the counselors for, there was a mouse in my room, I had an argument with my roommate, a bad grade. And at some point, you want kids to feel like they can handle these things. Not that I
Yeah.
want them to suffer, but you get these, you build up a little bit of tolerance. If there's no tolerance ever built up for discomfort or confusion or frustration, I don't think that's great for kids.
Exactly. So I was going to end it, but then I have one question. I can't help myself. Okay.
Oh gosh.
Okay.
Okay.
This is the zero tolerance thing with schools, and schools feeling like they can punish a kid for something that happens in the neighborhood during non-instructional time. I was shocked when I first came upon this. I remember talking
In your
to,
own life.
my kids were young, and there were their older parents with older kids who had like a junior in high school who were telling their kids, don't go to that party, because if you're at that party and there's alcohol, you'll get expelled. There's a zero tolerance policy about going to parties, even if you're not drinking. And afterwards, I was like, doesn't that seem creepy to you that a school can expel a kid for being at a party where there's alcohol served, even if they didn't know it? And why is it the school's business of what's happening at a party that is not at school? And I realized that had become the new normal somehow. And I don't know when it started or who said it was okay to do that, but that's not how it was when I was growing up. I mean, you can get in trouble for going to a party and drinking at a party. It's called the police. And
or your parents.
or your parents, but it wasn't, the school wasn't in the mix. When did that happen? And what's the state of play there?
I can't answer that question, except that let us note that once again, there's a certain level of surveillance that is becoming the norm from different authorities, whether it's your parents or the school. And there's just, if that is accepted, then we're starting to accept the idea of I can't call it a police state, because that sounds like I'm a crazy person who wants to go live in the hills of Montana with my meals ready to eat. But
Mhm.
once again, not being able to leave surveillance, not being able to go off the grid at all, whether you're riding your bike to the creek or at a high school party, that's priming kids for a level of surveillance that I don't want the schools to do. The schools are often, the schools are an authority. I don't want any authorities to have that level of intervention in my everyday decisions.
Good to talk to you.
All right, great to talk to you, David. Bye-bye.
All right.